Hello and welcome back after a long time yet again to G-senjou no Maou. You could really get the impression that I will never finish this in my lifetime, but yeah, we're continuing today. I just had, well, more or less a personal crisis which I have occasionally, and then my updates all around get a little bit more scarce, so to speak. And yeah, I hope I haven't gotten your mood down totally now, and we can just start into this where we left off. And I actually forgot what we did last time. Maybe I should have looked it up. I mean, not look it up, but I mean, look up a video what happened previously.
待ちわびた。
Oh, I really stopped with that happening? His brother, who turned out to be the actual Maou? Okay. I've waited a long time for this. The day has come to execute my final plan. I can't help but look back at the 10 years I've spent in preparation for this. Inspired by my father, Samijimi Toshikatsu, an employee of a trading company, I aspired to study overseas. 10 years ago, I was just a kid. I had no money or power to speak of. I attended the Imperial College of London, hoping to gain the qualifications necessary to work at my father's company. My younger brother, Kyosuke, was still young and unreliable. When I returned to Japan, every now and then, he'd make me play video games with him. His amiable personality and overall sociability was just like father. I remember him following me around, taking pictures of me as I helped mother with errands or chores. Thanks to father working himself to the brink, our family was never poor. Regardless, I refused any money they tried to give me to help pay for various expenses as I studied in Britain. I knew that mother, with her weak disposition, could have fallen ill at any moment. I also knew that father wanted to bring another life into the family. However, I did need the money. Thus, some friends and I decided to found a small import-export business in London to help pay the bills. You're studying, and while you study, you stamp out a business? That's dedication. Yeah, going into business before even finishing studying. Sure, if you're capable, well, by all means, do it. Calling it an import-export business makes it sound impressive, but it was just peddling cheap junk. Oh, okay. We sold t-shirts, pencils, Buddhist statues, and other such Japanese rubbish to shops in London. Japanese saran wrap and toiletries sold well for some reason. And there were a significant amount of orders for underwear emblazoned with kanji logos. Oh yeah, that's a thing. I mean, doesn't Japan have a vending machine where you can get small little balls out of it, and if you open it, there's a penny in it? Yeah, why do I even know things like that? Father would often packet such novelties and send them to Britain for us. You'll be a great trader someday, he told me. He always supported me from the bottom of his heart. I met Ellen one day as I walked into a pub, trying to hawk an air freshener that promised extra effectiveness against the smell of alcohol. He looked to be in his mid-40s. He wore an houndstooth checked flat cap, a cheap fox or fur windbreaker, I don't know how to pronounce that, and worn old slacks. Zipping a Guinness and lighting his pipe occasionally, he looked like your everyday working class Brit. "Alright, mate," he hollered as he waved me over with a smile. He bought something from me right off the bat. He said he loved Japan and would be a good customer. As we talked more, we started calling each other by our first names, and by the time he offered me a drink of sake, he already knew my background, specialties and interests. Being raised in a peaceful country like Japan, I was hopelessly vulnerable. A young Japanese man was like clay in the hands of a veteran recruiter like Alan. By the time he first said the word mercenary, I was drunk. Mercenary? I am a mercenary. My drunk self was more curious than cautious about that unfamiliar word. Supporting the business of war at its core was the lowest level of these so-called merchants of death. Mercenary recruiters. Merchants of death, mercenary recruiters. Any system with the possibility of cooperation will eventually spawn a profit-based equivalent. And with the monstrous amount of money involved in war, there will always be monsters out there looking for a cut. And in any case, Alan himself was not working for some Arab big shot or some capitalist corporate giant, but a monster that happened to deal in smaller figures. He had the proper qualifications and was a former member of a recruitment agency. However, mercenary recruiters are not permitted to act out in the open. That law exists for diplomatic reasons as a conformity to international law, and the connections to underground organizations cement it as an important rule to follow. Alan's talk captured the attention of his green listener. He tried to sweet-talk me into joining up as we drank Kurosawa and Yamato Damashi, and like a missionary for an evil cult, he waited patiently until his prey was no longer able to think. Aren't contracts you make while you're drunk are null and void? Even though it's hard to prove, I know. Still, I never said yes.
人殺しは悪です。
Murder is evil. As if to say he already knew that, he laughed and replied. But murder can sometimes save things that justice can't. I found that difficult to understand. It does steer a man's sense of adventure, but there's no reason to become something as mysterious as a mercenary. Warfare may be an unfortunate constant in this world of ours, but it had nothing to do with me. If you ever find yourself in need of power, call me anytime, Alan told me. After that day, a long time passed. My little sister was born and died. My father's silhouette, broken-hearted before little Kiyomo's portrait, is still burned into my eyes. And soon after that same father was arrested under suspicion of murder. When I received the news from mother, I abandoned studying for my upcoming Arabic midterm and returned to Japan. To Mambetsu City's holding cells. I was turned away 3 times under the excuse that they were still investigating the case, but I was eventually allowed to visit father.
手紙は読ませてもらいましたよ、お父さん。
I read your letter, Father. Father nodded from behind the acrylic plate. Above his droopy cheeks, his worn-out eyes told of his lack of sleep.
心臓の方はどうです？
How is your heart? Father vaguely shook his head. Not once in the letter did he whine, but he'd fainted a few times. The fainting spelled whereabouts of heart disease. He'd suffered from it the night he cried in front of Kiyomi's portrait as well.
死刑だなんて大げさな。どうか諦めないでください。
Please, Father, don't be so overdramatic. The death penalty? Try to keep your spirits up. Father had killed Yusami Yoshinori, his subordinate Kato, and two of Yusami's other Mayong friends who were present. Is he going to be given the death penalty? There are plenty of reasons to be sympathetic toward him. Nevertheless, his crime was premeditated, and it couldn't be helped if they saw his method of killing as brutal. He was just possessed by his urge to kill at least Yusami. The rest of them were just small-timers, riding off of Yusami's power. They could do nothing but mock Father. Then again, I personally think it's those kinds of vermin who deserve to die. I can't say I disagree with that. When I spoke with the lawyer, friend of Father's, he was unable to confidently determine whether or not Father had a chance at life. The decision wouldn't be made for 3 or 4 years after all. I was incredibly worried. What truly disturbed me was that the world sympathized with Yusami. As Father's letter detailed, Yusami was a fraud and a chronic gambler. None of this was reported in any newspapers or television programs. Apparently, Yusami had connections to politicians. Biggest liars of all time, most of them at least, not all of them. Perhaps his famous wife Mishima Kaoru had something to do with that. Would these things affect Father's sentencing, I wondered?
安心してください。万一に備えて死刑廃止論者の団体の方々にも協力をお願いしています。
Don't worry. Just in case, I've been cooperating with anti-death penalty groups. But each time I attended the meetings and study sessions, I lost more hope. What I wanted to save wasn't this country's future, but my father, a man who might be sentenced to death. Kyohei. Father gently called my name. Thanks, Kyohei. Father's tears lent a certain air of fulfillment to his eyes. I mustered my courage and replied,
お父さん、あなたは人を殺したことに後悔はなさっていないのですね。
Father, you really don't regret what you did, do you? Father bit his lip. I'm sorry. That sentence was certainly not aimed at Yusami or the other 3, but at our family. I imagined the scene of the inevitable trial. The prosecution shouting things like, "The defendant shows no signs of regret." Indeed, Father would never submit to Yusami's memory, nor should he have to. Kyohei, can a genius like you answer a question for your old man? He looked to be begging Buddha for salvation. Am I the demon everyone says I am? Definitely not. It's interesting. The story's interesting because they pierces in the gray morale of humankind. Because there is no pure good or there is no pure evil in the world. There are just decisions that lead to things that we categorize in good and evil. I think. I mean, look at that. I mean, maybe he is a criminal now, Mao, or in this case, Kyohei. But he became so in order to get justice for his father. Well, not really justice, but revenge. And revenge is kind of bad, but at the same time, in his mind, he does it for a good cause. So, even if some people are clearly evil, their motivations from their point of view is not all the time evil, but really they feel self-justified by it. So it's hard to convince them that what they do is actually more evil than what happened to them. And that's the weird thing. Evil things produce more evil, you could say. But also good things produce more good things. The bad thing about this, though, is that negative thoughts and negative things that happen have a bigger impact to stick with your brain. And that's, I think, the biggest downside of humanity. But that is, I think, again, very much ingrained into our DNA, that we have to keep in memory dangerous things or bad things in situations so we can react to them accordingly. This has to do with our survival instincts. And with the modern human, this can backfire as hard as this situation those people are currently in, with a feeling for revenge because something really bad and unjustified happened to them from their perspective, and they just can't let it go, which is understandable on the one hand, but not really justified on the other. Well, except for their own perspective. Indeed, he is a demon. My reason and morality whispered coldly into my chest. He loved his family more than anything else. The smiles he brought to us were countless. I felt something burning inside me, and I cursed my ingrained reason and morality.
父さんは正しい。
I knew he would say that. No, father. You are right. He'll always be, to me at least. That sentence, that determination sealed my life's fate.
お父さん、俺はイギリスに帰ります。しかし、必ず戻ってきます。何年先になるか分かりませんが、希望を捨てないでください。
Father, I'm returning to Britain. Rest assured, I'll be back. I don't know how many years it may take, but please, don't lose hope. There was no way I was going to sit back and suck my thumb as the judicial system pondered his fate. Fuck! I returned to Tomanbetsu City, packed my bags, and said goodbye to Kyosuke and mother. They were both worried at my departure. But wallowing in our sorrows wouldn't save father. I entrusted mother to Kyosuke and returned to Britain. My only miscalculation pertained to the beast named Azai Gonzo. The Yakuza debt collectors wouldn't relent on father's debt merely because he was in jail. Mother, left behind on her own, fell into Gonzo's clutches, but I was left in the dark about this until far later. Ellen greeted me with a huge grin at the aforementioned pub. I thought I'd see you again. I asked my one question bluntly. If I follow you, Will I gain enough power to free a prisoner from jail? Alan's gaze when he looked at me then changed for the very first time. I just procure mercenaries. I had no idea you wanted to be a terrorist. I didn't care what he called it. Terrorist, mercenary, soldier, I didn't care. All I wanted was to find a way to save my father. Well, I mean, every war zone is a terror zone, so any war is basically terrorism. More or less. I mean, we can stretch so many words to so far lengths. Well, work with us for now. Lots of our people declare themselves free agents after 2 or 3 years. It wasn't like I didn't have any hesitation toward going with Alan. It would mean having to go years without any contact with my mother in Japan. It was only when I got involved in the London underground bombings that my resolve strengthened. Terrorists angered by one of Britain's national issues blew up a subway platform with a suitcase bomb. There were around 500 casualties, and one of them was me. As I walked down the entrance's stairwell, my only injury was a bruised waist, but I was swept into the waves of panicking commuters and lost my bag, my wallet, and my passport. I jumped out of my seat as I watched the news the next day. On the list of the deceased was written Samejima Kyohei, Japanese. The London police force's half-assed investigations were so infamous that I'd even heard stories in Japan, so it wasn't all that surprising. For example, a month after I enrolled in college, a friend of mine was arrested. He was charged with sexual assault. Because he had an alibi, he was eating with me at the time, he was quickly released. Apparently the police barged in, arresting him merely because his girlfriend accused him. There was also a strange case involving another university, where an assistant professor was surrounded during a lecture by police, toting submachine guns. Okay, I can understand that if a girl accuses someone of being a sexual assaultant, which basically can turn into rape, I wish police would execute as fast as they do in this one. I mean, better to be safe than sorry, I most of the time say. And in this case, I can understand. I would understand it, that he's just... I mean, we have something called, we are under safety surveillance, so some people are locked up to clarify if he's a safety hazard or not for maximum 1 day, and if there's no hard evidence found, they will be released within a day or within a few hours. But at least they get investigated after they clarified that they are no threat. So that would be great if that is the case, that it would work like that, but it's not. Okay, back to the other thing with the teacher. I was surrounded during a lecture by police toting submachine guns. This too was because of a single testimony. This time by a Pakistani immigrant. Because the professor looked similar to a terrorist. Oh, now that's racist. But the other thing, you could say it's sexist, because Why only because a girl? A guy could also declare sexual harassment by another woman and he would be laughed at, which is a really cruel thing to do. I mean, I've seen scary women. Not that I ever was a victim of that, but I know it isn't out of the, you know, out of possibility, even though it's much, much rarer. In Japan, where people are only arrested after concrete proof of a crime is discovered, these false accusations rarely happen. Huh. Yeah, as I said, even here in Germany, it's not always that you get... there are lockup cells, but it rarely happens to the right people, and it is actually like he says it is in Japan, that without hard evidence, it's hard, or enough suspicion, it's hard to arrest people. We had actually someone who was accused by several sources without hard proof to be working with a terrorist group, but he was not locked up for safety measures, and guess what? I think 1 or 2 weeks later he committed a terrorist attack. Surprise! But everyone knew for not weeks, it was months. They knew for months that he's suspicious, that he got accused, but nobody had hard proof, so we couldn't do anything here. And then, boom, something blew up. And surprise, surprise, that guy got arrested then. I mean, so it isn't bad if people get locked up for safety procedures to avoid things like that. So they should be way more strict here, and I think in any other country about that. I'm not telling them to beat them up to death and then throw him in a cell. It has to be civil, and it has to be... And that only one dude can accuse you and get you locked up is also not a good solution. But if suspicion is so big that you know it for months, and if those voices get louder and louder and you just refuse to listen because there's a missing of hard evidence, dude. Oh man, this is getting too real. It's interesting. This game is so old, but the theme of it is so up to date, and that only tells me that in every fucking timeline, this is a thing. In every fucking timeline, terrorism, rape, racism, sexism, crimes, yakuza, it's always a thing. We just sometimes hear it louder or a little bit quieter, but it is always there. It's sad. But in Britain, these false accusations run rampant. The media makes a big to-do about the case nearly every time, ensuring that even after the charges are dropped, the damage has already been done. I can understand that Britain has been under terrorist threat for a long time, but it's gotten to the point where it's unsafe to walk around at night. People have been shot in the streets without any attempt at an arrest. See, now that is when it goes too far. Thus, I wouldn't be surprised if the man in immigration control assigned to the case was simply too busy shooting heroin to make a call confirming my death. When I was about to tell the embassy that I had merely dropped my passport, Ellen stopped me. If you stay dead, it'll shave 5 years of you fulfilling your dream. Wait, why 5 years? If you stay dead, it'll shave 5 years off of you fulfilling your dream. What does that mean? I remember in Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, I think there was a 7-year rule. If someone is missing in action or thought that he's dead and he doesn't show up within those years, he's officially be sentenced dead or something, and every contract with his name will fall out or something like that. Maybe is it that what he meant? It was later when I started working as a mercenary, specializing in intelligence gathering, that I'd fully realized the advantage of playing dead. Alongside the recruiters, there were also people who sold falsified records. For example, in Britain, there were Indo-Pakistani immigrants who were subcontracted by certain big shots in the mafia. They have a lot of big connections around the world, so as long as your request isn't too unreasonable, they help you cover up your past. They sold passports, driver licenses, and ID cards from various public organizations that allowed access to bank accounts, credit cards, or traveler's checks. You could buy pretty much anything you needed, as long as you had the money for it, of course. But regardless of how sloppy these countries' identity checks were in the face of modernized society, having a dead person pose as a dead person will always be far more reliable and economical than having a living person do so. After all, when you're officially dead, you don't have to worry about being the subject of any ongoing investigation. It also makes it impossible for someone to get an accurate profile of you. Oh. Kyohei, you're a man of outstanding talent. Ellen wasn't like the average recruiter swaggering around to Manbatsu City's Central Boulevard like they owned the place. The only people he had his eyes on were people who seemed promising, even if inexperienced. I had no intent to answer his expectations. I just signed the provisional contract to fulfill my own goal. Wait, but if he is officially a dead person, what good is a signed contract? The next day I paid my lodging costs and headed to a rural area on the outskirts of London. Oh shit! At first glance it was just a regular farm. No, it was a regular farm. There were cows, goats and sheep, and people milking them without a care in the world. They said the training camp was just the farmer's side job, but it was obviously being financed by some conglomerate or syndicate. In other words, he must have been a high-ranking warlord that no doubt has more than a few mercenaries under contract. Needless to say, he was quite wealthy. And a common aspect of the wealthy in any country would be their propensity for cutting costs. Our lodgings were coarse, our meals mostly scant, and vegetarian in nature. I, along with all the other fools that fell prey to the temptations of the devil, was assigned to a group of 5 or 6 people. We all then underwent medical and fitness evaluations. During the initial stages, there was a heavy emphasis on exposing any special skills or experience that might be of some use. More often than not, this took the form of an intense interrogation. It felt like we were part of some twisted livestock competition. However, since these procedures were only a formality, people like fugitives, deviants, and the like were not filtered out of the selection. Britain is a country of a wide races. so naturally the people gathered were also quite varied. I was forced into a sweatshop alongside an extremely pale man, and after 3 days there, I caught a glimpse of a veritable giant sobbing. After having my aptitude harshly evaluated, I was called into another room. There, I was beckoned over by a stern-looking Caucasian dressed in military uniform. Apparently the fact that I had told them I was a black belt in karate had caught their attention. The man was less intimidating than he looked. He had gotten into a fight on the streets of London once before, but Westerners in general have a tendency to try to subdue you with physical strength. As long as you take the proper distance and avoid their unrefined charges and kicks, one swift counter to the vitals is all it takes. But putting my skills on display like that was an act of suicide in a way, as it resulted in upping the level of training I received. Once you reach the 5th level, they send you off to the battlefield. This facility, given the nickname The Pen, is one of many scattered through Europe. It was indeed common for these war wenches to camouflage themselves as everyday crop or dairy farms, but in some countries they operated right out in the open. After the cattle parade was over and I had signed a contract with mercenary contractor, I was sent to a military school in Switzerland that was famous for churning out soldiers of fortune. My instructor there was a man that went by the Devil. He was a short, slender man, and he was such a gentleman that, if it weren't for the military uniform, you might mistake him to be the manager of a fine tailoring business or the like. For someone who went by the Devil, he was fairly mild-mannered. He was nothing like the cruel drill sergeant you might see in a movie. Well, the Devil has his silver tongue, so the Devil is not always a waging beast. That's what the Devil does, if there is one. I think the Devil is always pictured as a very gentle guy who tries to more or less seduce you to do what he wants without you knowing you do it. I had heard that he was an ex-member of the British Special Forces. Of course, there was a sort of unwritten rule that one mustn't talk about one's past, so to this day I don't know for sure whether that was true or just a rumor. What I do know is that the Devil certainly could display some incredibly advanced techniques. Between lights out at 9 PM and rising at 4 AM, the Devil would occasionally launch a guerrilla attack on us as we slept. The curriculum was divided into field and study. In the field segments, we covered topics such as the usage of munitions, marksmanship, the proper methods of arming and dismantling bombs, sabotage, close quarters combat, and reconnaissance. The study segments covered subjects such as communications, navigation, survival, and the like. Due to the harsh training, there were some among us who dropped out. Some even became handicapped after an accident during training. Oh gosh. The only reason things went smooth for me was because besides my native Japanese, I was fluent in English, Arabic, German, French, and Spanish. You look like playing around, don't you? What a child. One day after a training session in close quarters combat, the Devil came over to offer me words in a rare, harsh tone. It's true, I did have a habit of taking my time and finishing off my opponent after getting them to the ground. I held off because I wanted to see how they would react when thrown into a predicament. You had a bit of a smile on your face, you know that? I actually had never noticed it myself, but regardless, it was a rhetorical question. Try paying a little respect to your enemy. I'm not training psychotic murderers here. The British gentry have a set of prerequisites virtues before... had a set of prerequisite virtues before one can call oneself as gentleman. Virtues before one can call oneself a gentleman. I mean, that reminds me of Jojo. On one hand, he was teaching us how to kill people. On the other, he was preaching morals. I was probably on edge with murderous excitement at the time. After all, I was being taught how to kill people day in and day out. During meals and breaks, everyone always looked down in silence. We didn't want to see each other's faces. If we did, we probably want to kill each other. Asking us to respect our enemy as we were being eyed by gun-toting guards was simply preposterous. I couldn't help but grab my stomach and laugh. Then, how do you explain the brutal acts performed by some British soldiers in the last war in the Middle East? Hypocrisy honestly believe that the good deeds of the few can really save the world over time. Hypocrites honestly believe that the good deeds of the few can really save the world over time. If you want to put up the smoke and mirrors on someone like that, just drop an analogy on a grander scale. Mention human nature, talk about a whole nation, discuss the inherent implications of society, currency, or property. Simply start a conversation with something akin to a didactic novelist's opening, and you're guaranteed a hit or two. I was fully prepared to be struck for what I said, but that was the first time I had felt respect for the devil. That's exactly right, child. Where are we right now? A dump, I answered. That's right, a dump. Right now, unprecedented terrorism threatens Japan. People continue to die every second in Africa, but that has nothing to do with us. For we do not live in the world, we live in the individual. And then the lips of the devil, who had just earlier removed his gentlemanly mask, twisted into a smile befitting his name. That reminds me of the military soldier Loli in this one anime. This facility is one of the most preeminent military academies in all of Europe. Our alumni are, as a whole, either emotionally numb or have their own personal dark beliefs, which they cannot or will not shoulder onto anyone else. I expect great things from you, he said as he tapped me on the shoulder. I understood that. Let us assume that right and wrong, good and evil are subjective concepts. Like I tried to explain, miserably, but I tried. Thus, without any objectivity to guide you, without any semblance of reality or fact, one can only truly be a king of evil when living in one's own personal reality until the bitter end. Only in one's own mind can one truly be the devil, the Maou. At any rate, mercenaries aren't trained to become charity workers. If a cadet fails to graduate from the academy and get on the market after 2 to 5 weeks, he won't make it in the industry. At my graduation, the devil proposed a certain code name to me. His own, the devil, in my native tongue, Maou. However, not a single mercenary or assassin in the world would use such a joke of an alias. Only when I was among companions, or when an operation did not require the use of a code name, did I go by the name Maou. When I did though, only when I was among companions, or when an operation did not require the use of a code name, did I go by the name Maou. When I did so, I thought back to my old instructor. Granted, that was only because by the time I made it to my first battle, the devil had already passed away. They say a new recruit's reaction to his first kill can vary from person to person, but I was so composed at the time that it surprised even my unit commander. I set an ambush for the enemy by taking aim from a hiding place in the tall grass, just as I had practiced in training. All I did was pump lead into whatever moved. I don't see any reason to be deeply moved over something like that. I could hear the murmurs of the devil inside me, breathing into Samijima Kyohei's ears. These are not remains, but a body. It is not the dead, but an object. Those whispers protected me from guilt, regret, and escapism. After the battle, an American that had been put on point was crying and muttering to himself. "I'm not a killer. I'm not a murderer. Murderers are people that go after those weaker than themselves. I can't be a murderer." Being placed at the front was a form of consideration meant to ensure he didn't fire upon an ally in derangement. When we began to relocate for our next campaign, he suddenly turned around and pointed his gun at an ally. At that exact moment, as if he was expecting it to happen, the commander shot him dead on the spot. I too had my gun at the ready. The lesson I learned that day? Making excuses for your actions will only get you killed. I roamed the battlefields as a mercenary for about 2 years. My jobs lasted anywhere from 2 weeks to 5 months. I worked as a guard for a diamond mine, participated in the annihilation of a group of fascist guerrillas, and even participated in the front lines of a failed operation as a member of the army for a country that did not have its own special forces. I could have sworn I was a goner on that particular job. I got separated from my guide in the middle of the jungle, but I was fortunate enough to stumble upon a secure and safe water source and make it out alive. 2 years later, I reunited with Alan. Looks like I was right about you. You did well to make it this far. The relationship between a mercenary and his contractor was like the relationship between a prostitute and the Yakuza drug dealer she buys from. In other words, you're trapped in a hell where no matter how much you work, you'll never make a profit. In fact, some of my fellow comrades had been sent to a military school by the contractors even after the contracts had expired, in order to provide them with further training. The amount of money you could get as a novice mercenary was no better than the salary you would earn working in a convenience store in Japan. But even so, it was enough money to allow people who came from warring third world countries to feed their family for years. It's not like you got into this business for the money, is it, Kyohei? It goes without saying. Money was necessary, of course, but in order to put my plan for revenge into action, I would first need some connections. That's right, revenge. Ending dozens of human lives for no reason in particular had changed my way of thinking. So my dad had killed Yusami and 3 other people. What of it? They were all vermin. They weren't local militia, fighting for freedom. They weren't child soldiers from the Middle East, who had been taught nothing but how to kill from the very moment they were born. In fact, in my eyes, they were rare examples of people who were killed for a reason. Even if you were to kill a civilian, you would not be court-martialed as long as your side won. And as I saw more and more of these travesties, I came to find the fact that my father was going to trial at all to be absurd. As a child, I had talked about wanting to save my father. Now I found myself driven by the impulse to destroy everything that Japan stood for. You are a free agent now, Kyohei. I hope you don't mind me trying to recruit you again, but as a full-blown merc this time. I told him that I'd had enough of going into armed conflicts with blazing guns. To be honest, I just wasn't cut out for combat. My main downfall would be my tall build. A bigger body makes for a bigger target. In fact, most of the soldiers you see bragging about their prowess are the ones of normal height and build, people that wouldn't stand out at a glance. Occasionally you see one of those big muscled gorillas like they show in the movies, but most of those either meet a quick death or go mad and become useless. To exacerbate the problem, I apparently had a disrespectful habit of treating the whole process as some sort of fearless game. I never actually intended it to be that way, but people had pointed out to me on several occasions that I intentionally avoided striking vital areas. On the battlefield, where a split-second judgment could mean the difference between life and death, this was a fatal flaw. However, I had a certain talent in liaisons due to my language studies. For the second stage of my revenge, I began gathering experience in espionage and intelligence. When someone says mercenary, most people generally have the preconception of a soldier, and I was honestly no different. But as one would expect, the jobs requested by the clients that put forth the best pay are, naturally, quite difficult and highly confidential in nature. They usually have months, sometimes even years of planning put into them beforehand. Also, unsurprisingly, these jobs come with harsh prerequisites. One of the reasons Ellen wanted to recruit me happened to be because I was Asian. Japanese people are a scarcity among mercenaries. Because of this, I was sometimes given opportunities to pose as someone of Taiwanese, Korean, or Hong Kongese descent. Of course, I posed as an innocent Japanese tourist on occasion as well. This allowed me to get around and do my work freely without suspicion. I suppose I don't have to go into the importance of information warfare. Needless to say, the pay was on a completely different level compared to when I was an infantryman. But the risk involved justified that. Since mercenary work is not protected under any treaties or agreements, I was in danger of becoming just another unidentified corpse at any time whenever I infiltrated enemy territory with a fake passport. Since a dead man is difficult to track, I quickly earned a reputation as an excellent spy. On one occasion, when I was in Moscow placing bids on military-grade explosives, a very interesting story caught my ear. A famous violinist by the name of Mishima Kaoru would be playing a concert at a nearby theater. The officer who told me of this said that there was going to be a high-ranking Arab official in the audience, and that he was keen on cooperating with America. Thus, he wanted to kill him. However, my attention was purely on Mishima Kaoru herself, Yusami Yoshinori's wife. Great, let's kill him. The decision was no more difficult than deciding what to eat for breakfast. Oh, that's cold. The officer returned a smile. Having built up a decent number of connections, I gathered a group of men that would do anything for money, with the help of my mercenary friends. It mostly comprised bodyguards for high rollers in extensive drug cartels, and kidnappers for hire. I acted as the team's commander. In an attempt to misdirect the police force, I leaked information beforehand that there was going to be a bombing at a bank across the city. It worked rather well, as the operation went off quite smoothly. I smuggled in the C4 personally. The image of a Japanese tourist that incredibly free pass to whatever event you may desire access to worked brilliantly. I succeeded in placing the detonator and then waited until Mishima Kaoru's performance to set it off. When I finished off Mishima Kaoru, as she lay half dead from the blast, I felt a strange sense of anti-climax, like I had just finished my taxes or something. It was then that I first met her daughter, Yusami Haru. She called herself Hero, probably from insanity induced by fear. People may be right about me when they say I have an irreverent habit of playing around. The video games I played with Kyosuke always had a righteous story about a hero whose village was burned to the ground. After coming to terms with a lot of his family, the hero would gain power over time and eventually come to defeat the evil demon lord. That is Maou. If someone were to ask me why I didn't kill her, I could only answer that it was because it would be more interesting that way. No. To be absolutely honest, the conscience which I was sure I had purged began to ache. A father is a father, and a daughter is a daughter. I remember feeling that way even after killing her innocent mother. My common sense ethics had warned me against slaughtering a young child. In the end, as the years passed, I ended up forgetting about Yusami Haru. Anyway, I decided to let her off then, especially since I had to worry about escaping the authorities. In time. After that, I tried to check up on my father's situation in Japan. His sentence from the first trial was death. My worst fears had become reality. Granted, whether he received life in prison or a mere 5 years, I still intended on putting my plan into action. Luckily, father had apparently taken what I said to heart, as he was in the process of an appeal. But the real kicker, what truly bothered me, was my mother's situation. When I secretly went to see her, I found her in a hospital bed. From what information I could gather, it seemed she had been diagnosed with a mental illness. Furthermore, she had been living alone for quite some time. Alone, I thought? Where had Kyosuke gone off to? When I discovered the answer to that question, I seized with rage. My little brother, the one I had entrusted my mother to, had been adopted by, of all people, Azai Gonzo, and was devoting himself to the pursuit of pittance profit. I had changed so much that even my mother failed to recognize me. I grew more deeply absorbed in my preparations. When one works in the field of espionage long enough, one inevitably meets fellow intelligence workers from the private sector, namely from trading corporations. And when that corporation is as gargantuan as the Sanou Corporation, it would be unheard of not to employ a few people with the little task of selling the copious information stumbled upon by the company. I grew close to one such person, and through him to the CEO. At the time, Sanou was experiencing a few problems common to multi-billion-dollar enterprises. Meeting sales quotas in a million-dollar company is simple. One only needs to sell a few Mercedes Benzes or a yacht or two to maintain growth and revenue. A billion-dollar company, though, is something else entirely. It's a near impossibility to hold such incredible capitalistic power without dipping into military affairs. In Sanou's defense, they did have a secret factory in Latin America, wanting to supply weapons to third world countries. But in the end, it amounted to a mere fraction of a percent of the arms dealing business as a whole. Thus, I propose that they use another company under their umbrella to export manufactured weapons out of Japan. Weapon exports are outlawed in Japan, but that is exactly why they would lead to profit if successful. There are a good number of independent weapons dealers in the world, people that sell out on an attached case. I set them up with Sanou, established a few bases along fishing harbors in Japan, and cultivated a market. We set out from harbors in Niigata and Fukui, then made deliveries over the sea to a North Korean vessel. From there we formed a land route from Pyongyang to Vladivostok. Once in Russia, we sent our goods all the way to Moscow, and at this point we didn't have to worry about being tracked. Furthermore, while bribes won't work on customs officials in Japan, classic smuggling tricks like triple walling your shipping containers can sometimes get your exports through. And while spearheading Sanou's darkest dealings, Maou was busy with a business plan of his own. I consulted with Alan. You want to start up a mercenary contracting organization in Japan? Alan's eyes sparkled. He no longer treated me as the greenhorn child I once was. He now recognized me as a fully independent adult. I know that Japanese are in high demand. That's why I had my eyes on you. But Japan is a prosperous country. What do you think is going to apply? I can't imagine there's much profit to be had.
私も裕福な家庭に育った。けれど、物質的な豊かさに関係なく、心の貧しい人間というのはどこの国でもいるものだ。
I myself was raised in a wealthy family, but regardless of race or homeland, there will always be people in need. Not of money, perhaps, but of fulfillment at the very least. For example,
未来を担う坊やたちです。
children burdened with the future. To a Westerner like Alan, the Japanese give off the impression of a very polite, punctual, and communal people, always concerned with what the family and other people think. For example, corporate scandals are publicly apologized for by a representative of the company. Oh yeah, they are always civil, have common sense and stuff, and yet Japan is the biggest source of hentai and porn and slightly, well, not slightly, but really, really gray area porn, and a lot of other things. But yeah, sure. It's just so funny for me to think about it. That I think one of the most polite countries which are really strive to have their kids the best education they can get. I think it is Japanese in China, actually. I'm not sure. I really don't know what's going on in the world. I only know stereotypes. Please apologize for that. Or apologize me for that. But in any case, yeah. Japanese people are very lewd. Very, very lewd. A lot of them. Not all of them. But also are almost every other person in the world. They just don't openly admit it all the time. For example, corporate scandals are publicly apologized. In the West, even heinous criminals don't apologize to the bereaved family very often. Some theorize that this sort of peer pressure or desire to fit in formed a loose standard that functioned as a sort of deterrent against the emergence of violent criminals within Japan. But in recent years, the change in social environments has weakened the sense of unity amongst Japanese, a trend marked by a rise in individualism. Heinous crimes committed by young children who received insufficient love and attention at home or have been ostracized by their peers in the community have gradually started to grab people's attention. I spoke to Alan about what I had read in a certain book, and then informed him of my own original, delightful little proposal.
彼らに銃を与えてみたらどうか。
Why don't we try giving them guns? For example, bullying is a problem in every developed nation. Yet for some reason child suicide rates in Japan stand out as exceptionally high.
私はひどく悲しいんだ、アラン。これがアメリカだったら、銃を片手にギャングの仲間入りをするという道があったろう。
Oh god, that gets highly political again. You don't know how much this saddens me, Alan. If this were America, they would have the option to grab a gun and join a gang. If we can discover talented individuals and then give them the proper training, you can bet they'll justify our investment when they become capable warriors. This procedure, almost akin to kidnapping, proved to be fairly successful in the West. After all, acting as a mercenary recruiter is a pretty extreme job, and while their numbers have certainly decreased, they are still in operation across many regions in Europe, even to this day. You have my full support, Maou. Thusly, I began my roaming through the streets of Japan. My first targets were the children of corporate presidents and the bastard children of politicians. The rationale behind this choice was that if their training turned out to be a bust, I would at least be able to use them as hostages for ransom from their parents. I soon began to target lower-ranking members of organized crime wings as well, and then members of biker gangs or the like, who would soon be on their way into organized crime. The talent I sought was that of pitiful children who faced unjust treatment within their family, school, or workplace. Children with nowhere to turn but to violence. Oh, that's such a sad image. I mean, it's not even far from the truth. I mean, this hits so much home, but people are just talking about the terrorism aspect and not about the cause of it. They don't... The interesting thing is, in Germany, in America, or almost anywhere else, they try to blame video games movie industries and the likes and the likes and the likes. But no, the parents are innocent. The parents treat their children right. It's not the fault of bad parenting because the father the drunk or the mother is a cunt or whatever. Not that I accuse any of your parents to be that, but that's just how this kind of things happen. It's not the violent video games, it's not the movies or the industries. It's really that some kids are just neglected way too easily. We have things like kindergarten and other things where you can drop off your young children to play with other young children, which seems to be good, but the problem is they are so young that they can't form a meaningful relationship with their parents in the important early first 6 to 10 years they would need to develop what it means to trust in someone very deeply. So even if they may have the possibility of learning social skills when they get in kindergartens and the likes, that you try to put them away to do your job, which in my opinion is not as important as being there for your kids. I mean, why the fuck do you have even children? To show them off when they are good? It's just something that gripes me for a long time now. It's just something. Yeah, I had a teacher in biology. I had a biology teacher once who really made us think about things like that. He gave us articles not a lot of people speak about and not a lot of people report about, and they were really, really stunning and really mind-boggling. That dropping your young children with the age of 3 or sometimes even 2 years or even 1 year already, you can put them in a how's it called? In a crib or something where other people raise them for you over the half of the day because you want to go to work for more important stuff. But not with all the money in the world. You can give them what they actually need to become proper human beings. The love of their mother and father. It's just such a twisted thing to have. And I don't even know. I mean, I personally would be fully committed to quit my work, more or less. Well, if there is no other way, to actually be there for my child for the longest time, for at least 6 years. Or even longer if I see the need to arise. Or maybe even I take turns with my wife if she is up for it. If I have one, not implying I have any children or wife, but that's what I think, what I would do. It's a hard topic to talk about because a lot of people can hate me for that, and a lot of people can, well, not praise me, but like me for that I think like that. But still, sometimes I think it's a really cool world we live in, and I still struggle to find my place in it. In any case, where were we left off? One of my many pleasures was watching these children grow. I loved to see what they did with themselves after learning how to sell cocaine or being given weapons to rob a bank. The information network among children in Japan was not to be underestimated. As rumors about Maou quickly spread, eventually I did not have to go looking for talent. Talent came to me. In all seriousness though, it should be noted that it's natural for a boy to want to fire a .44 Magnum at least once in his life. A troubled family background isn't necessarily a factor there. Anyway, Among all these children was an exceptional example of talent. Tokita Yuki. My experience with female mercenaries was limited solely to rumors, as a testament to how rare they must be. It was such a shame that Tokita turned out to be an acquaintance of Yusami's. Now then.
始めるとしよう。
It's about time to get started. The Supreme Court rejected my father's appeal for clemency just the other day. I made it just in the nick of time. If my father had been killed, my revenge would have no doubt spread beyond the city's borders. I look up at the Sanoo building, the place my father once worked, and the place I utilized to assist in my arms smuggling. It's finally time to pay the piper, Sanoo. I'm here to collect my dues from the despicable organization that unjustly covered for Yusami Yoshinori and sentenced my father to capital punishment. My only remaining worries are that Hiro and my traitorous kid brother Kyosuke. You like playing around, don't you? What a child. I close my eyes, and the image of that old Swiss training center comes to mind as I hear my instructor's voice.
もう、坊やではありませんよ。魔王。
I am no longer a child, devil. Alright, and on that note, I am ending the episode. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to help me out, it would mean a lot to me if you share my channel with at least one of your friends. Just give them a glimpse of what they could maybe find here. It means more to me than any subscription or like I could receive. So, stay tuned for more.